I pulled into the driveway just after 4 in the afternoon, still buzzing from the meeting with my grandmother's estate lawyer. 3 hours in a beige boardroom on King Street West, and I had walked out holding documents that changed everything. My grandmother had left me her entire estate, $1.4 million in savings, a paid-off property in Prince Edward County, and a portfolio of government bonds she had been quietly building since the 1980s. I hadn't even known about the bonds. I sat in my car for 10 minutes outside the lawyer's office, just staring at the steering wheel because I genuinely didn't know how to feel. My grandmother had raised me after my parents split. She was the kind of woman who reused plastic bags and argued with cashiers over 5-cent discrepancies, and apparently she had been sitting on over $1 million the entire time. I drove home wanting to tell my husband. He was standing on the front porch when I turned in. He and his mother side by side like they'd been waiting. I noticed his jaw first, that particular set he gets when he's made a decision and doesn't want to argue about it. His mother had her arms crossed and her chin lifted the way she always does when she thinks she's already won something. My husband held out an envelope before I even opened the car door. I took it. I stood in the driveway and read it right there. Divorce papers. Dated 3 days ago. The house sold this morning, he said. Conventional period cleared last week. You'll need to be out by the end of the month. I looked at him. Then I looked at his mother. Then I looked back at the papers in my hand and I smiled. What is wrong with you? His mother said. Did you hear what he just told you? I folded the papers carefully along the crease and tucked them under my arm. I heard, I said. I'll need a copy of the purchase agreement. My husband's name is Trevor. We had been married for 9 years. I had spent the first 4 of those years believing we had a partnership, splitting expenses, building savings, talking about buying land in the Okanagan eventually. Then his mother retired from her position at the insurance company and moved 40 minutes away to Guelph, and everything shifted so gradually that by the time I understood what was happening, it had already been happening for a long time. She started with small things. Calling during dinner, not because she needed anything but just to talk, and he would leave the table and not come back until the food was cold. She had opinions about where we vacationed, which turned into opinions about how we spent weekends, which turned into opinions about whether my job, I'm a forensic accountant, was too stressful for our household. She never said it directly to me. She said it to him, and he carried her words into our conversations as though they were his own thoughts. I noticed the accounts the way I notice most financial irregularities, not all at once, but in pieces that don't fit together until suddenly they do. The joint account we used for household expenses started running lower than it should have, not dramatically. $50 here, $200 there. Trevor handled the bill payments, so I was never looking at it closely, but I am a forensic accountant. Looking closely is basically a reflex. I pulled 18 months of statements one afternoon while he was at his hockey game, and his mother was wherever his mother was. I sat at the kitchen table with a highlighter and I went through every line. What I found was a pattern of transfers. Small amounts, irregular intervals, from our joint account to an account I didn't recognize. Nothing that would have flagged on its own. Everything together pointed in one direction. I didn't say anything. I opened my own spreadsheet, noted the dates, the amounts, the account number fragments I could see in the transaction details. I took photographs of the statements and stored them in my cloud account with a password I had never shared with Trevor. That was 14 months ago. Over the following months, I documented everything. I hired a lawyer, a woman I had worked with on a corporate fraud case 2 years prior, who I trusted completely and who had exactly zero patience for procedural sloppiness. Her name is not important. What matters is that she is very good. We built a file. The transfers were going to an account registered under Trevor's mother's name, not hers. They had apparently decided at some point that keeping one step removed made it cleaner. It didn't. The total across 22 months came to just over $61,000 drawn from our joint account, which we had both contributed to in equal amounts from our respective incomes. There was also the matter of the house. Our home was jointly owned, both names on the title. Trevor had approached a private buyer, someone connected to his colleague, and had used a power of attorney document to sign on my behalf. The power of attorney was dated 8 months ago. I had never signed it. The signature on it is not mine, and a handwriting analysis report sitting in my lawyer's file says so clearly with a 15-page technical appendix. He had sold our home without my knowledge or consent. He had forged my signature to do it. And he had done it while I was going through the hardest year of my life, my grandmother's illness, her decline, the months of driving to Kitchener on weekends to sit with her, of making decisions about her care, of watching her get smaller. He had done it during all of that. So when he stood on that porch and handed me divorce papers and told me I was homeless, I smiled because I had been waiting for this moment for 11 months, and I was ready, and he had absolutely no idea. "You need to leave," he said that evening when I was upstairs. He had followed me to the bedroom doorway. "The buyers take possession in 31 days. That's more than enough time." "I'm not leaving in 31 days," I said. I was folding laundry. I kept folding it. "You don't have a choice, Rebecca." He said my name like a period at the end of a sentence. "The sale is done. The money is in trust. We're done. I'll need the name of the buyer's lawyer," I said, "and the name of whoever handled the sale on your end." He stood there looking at me like I had said something in a language he didn't recognize. "For the divorce proceedings," I added. "Standard disclosure." He left. I heard him on the phone in the kitchen, voice low. His mother probably, strategizing. I sat on the edge of the bed and I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to feel all of it, the exhaustion, the grief, the specific humiliation of being in a house that someone had sold out from underneath me while I was grieving my grandmother. I let myself feel it fully, then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "He gave me the papers tonight," I said. "Good," she said. "Are you okay?" "I think so." "Good," she said again. "Then let's talk about next week." My mother-in-law arrived the next morning at 8:30 with coffee and a proprietary air, as though she was already redecorating in her head. She sat at my kitchen table, and she told me with genuine warmth that she hoped we could handle this like adults. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. "Trevor and I have been talking for a long time about this," she said. "This isn't about you, Rebecca. It's about what's right for him." "Of course," I said. "He worked very hard for everything in this house, everything he built. He deserves to benefit from that." "Absolutely," I said. She looked at me with the slightly unsettled expression people get when they expect resistance and don't find it. "We were hoping you wouldn't make this difficult." "I won't," I said. I sipped my coffee. "You should know that my grandmother passed away 6 weeks ago." "I know that, dear. I'm sorry for your loss." "She left me her estate," I said. "I met with the lawyer yesterday. It's significant." Her expression shifted. Just slightly. A flicker of recalculation. "That's wonderful for you," she said carefully. "Isn't it?" I agreed. She left 20 minutes later, earlier than she'd clearly planned. I watched her car back out of the driveway and I thought, you have no idea that your name is in a file right now with the Ontario Securities Commission, the Canada Revenue Agency, and my lawyer's very thorough paralegals. The thing about forensic accounting is that it teaches you patience. You don't react to the first number that looks wrong. You wait, you collect. You build the complete picture before you do anything with it. I had completed that picture 4 months ago. The CRA referral had gone in on a Tuesday in February. The OSC complaint related to Trevor's mother's undisclosed account activity. She had been running a small informal investment scheme among her church group, promising guaranteed returns on high-yield vehicles she had no actual access to, had gone in the following Thursday. My lawyer had filed a civil fraud claim against Trevor in March, which was the same week I had quietly transferred my personal savings into a new account in my name only, at a different institution, and retained an independent financial advisor. The RCMP Financial Crimes Unit had opened a file in April. I had known about all of this for months. I had been sleeping in this house, cooking in this kitchen, nodding along while Trevor made comments about my career and his mother called every other evening, and I had known. I had just been waiting for the right moment. The morning after he served me the divorce papers, I made a phone call I had been planning for 3 weeks. I called the real estate lawyer who had handled the sale of our house. I told her calmly and with documentation to follow that the power of attorney used to execute the sale on my behalf was fraudulent, that I had a handwriting expert's report to substantiate that, and that I would be filing with the Law Society of Ontario if the transaction was not flagged and halted pending investigation. There was a very long silence. "Mrs. Harwood," she finally said, "if what you're describing is accurate." "It's accurate," I said. "I'll email you the report in the next 10 minutes. The sale did not close. The buyer's lawyer was notified. The transaction was suspended pending a fraud investigation. Trevor did not find out until 2 days later when his own lawyer called him. I was in the backyard with a cup of tea when I heard him shout from inside the house. I stayed in my backyard, he came outside. His face was a color I can only describe as a very specific kind of rage that comes from someone who has been absolutely certain they had everything under control. "What did you do?" he said. "I protected my interest in our jointly held property," I said, "which is my legal right as a co-owner." "You had no right, that sale was signed with a forged power of attorney," I said, "which, just so you know, is fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. Section 380. My lawyer has the full analysis." He stood there. "Trevor," I said, "you sold our house using my forged signature. You transferred $61,000 from our joint account to your mother's account over 22 months. You've been planning this for at least 2 years. I looked at him. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" He didn't answer. I think part of him had genuinely believed that. "I'm a forensic accountant," I said. "Finding this kind of thing is literally what I do for work." What followed was not a single dramatic moment but a series of them over several weeks, each one more clarifying than the last. The RCMP officers arrived on a Thursday morning, 2 of them in plain clothes with a warrant to examine financial records. They were professional and quiet, and they spent 4 hours in the house while Trevor sat in the living room, with his jaw locked and said almost nothing. His mother was called and told not to leave her home in Guelph, as officers would be visiting her as well. I went to work. I had a client file to complete. My forensic report on a construction company's expense irregularities wasn't going to write itself, and I had a deadline. I kissed absolutely no one goodbye. That evening, my lawyer called. "The ZOSC has formally opened its investigation into the account activity," she said. "And the RCMP team found additional transfers we hadn't identified yet. Looks like there's a secondary account that routed through a numbered company. This is bigger than you thought." "How much bigger? I don't know yet. But Rebecca, your instincts were right all the way down." I sat at my kitchen table, the kitchen table that was still mine, in the house that was still mine, in the life I had protected while everyone assumed I was just quietly falling apart. And I felt something unwind in my chest that had been tightly coiled for over a year. His mother's situation turned out to be the part Trevor had not fully understood himself. She had told him the account was a savings vehicle. She had not told him she had been soliciting money from 11 people in her community, people from her church and her former book club and a neighbor down the street, promising them consistent returns from investment products she had no legitimate access to. Informal, she had called it, a favor, an inside opportunity. The CRA investigation found that she had collected somewhere between $280,000 and $340,000. The full accounting was still being completed at the time and had paid out fictitious returns to early participants using money from later participants. It was not sophisticated, it was not small. The transfers from our joint account, I came to understand, had been Trevor quietly funneling money to support his mother's scheme when her outflows started to exceed her inflows. He had been bankrolling a fraud. Whether he had fully understood what he was participating in was a question for the courts to determine. I did not feel sorry for him. I want to be clear about that. I had spent 9 years being a good partner to a man who had been slowly, deliberately dismantling our shared life while I was watching my grandmother die. Whatever complicated feelings I might have had about our marriage, they had been processed and filed and closed a long time before those divorce papers ever arrived. What I felt, mostly, was tired, and then less tired. And then, as the weeks passed and the legal processes moved forward and the house remained mine, and my grandmother's estate was transferred into my account, something that took me a while to recognize as simply being okay. The first time I drove to the Prince Edward County property, my property, the one my grandmother had left me, was on a Saturday in October. It's about 2.5 hours east of Toronto. I stopped at a gas station outside Belleville and bought a terrible coffee and a package of those crackers with the peanut butter in the middle that I used to eat as a kid. And I drove the rest of the way with the windows down, because the air smelled like lake and turning leaves. The property is a small house on about 3 acres, overlooking a field that backs into a woodlot. The roof needed work, the porch had one board that had gone soft, the kitchen had probably not been updated since 1994. Inside, it smelled like my grandmother. Cedar and a faint trace of the lavender soap she ordered from a small shop in Halifax every year without fail. I stood in her kitchen for a long time, then I opened my notebook and started writing down what needed to be done. Trevor's lawyer contacted mine in November with a settlement proposal. It was revised 3 times. The final agreement acknowledged the fraudulent sale attempt, addressed the joint account withdrawals, and included terms that my lawyer described as appropriate, given the criminal exposure. I signed in early December. Trevor signed the following week. I did not attend the signing. I was in Prince Edward County overseeing the roof replacement. My contractor, a woman from Picton who came with a binder of references and finished exactly when she said she would, had told me the original roof had another winter in it at best. I paid her in full and she left me with a 10-year warranty and a recommendation for a plumber she trusted. The charges against Trevor's mother proceeded through the courts over the following year. I was not involved in those proceedings except as a witness for the CRA on the financial documentation. I gave my evidence, answered the questions I was asked, and left. I did not watch the sentencing. What I heard, through my lawyer, was that the judge had ordered full restitution to the defrauded investors, that Trevor's mother had received a conditional sentence given her age and lack of prior record, and that she had lost almost everything she had. The Guelph property, the remaining account balances, the investments, all of it liquidated toward the restitution order. The 11 people she had taken money from were repaid in full from the recovered assets. I thought about that for a long time. About those 11 people, a retired school teacher, a widow who had trusted a woman she sat next to at church every Sunday, people who had handed over their savings because someone they liked had told them it was safe. That part was not satisfying. That part was just sad. By the following spring, I had moved out of the Toronto house. My share of the marital equity, once the legal proceedings were resolved, gave me enough to work with. My grandmother's estate covered the rest, and then some. I kept my practice. If anything, the whole experience had sharpened my instincts in ways I suspect will take years to fully understand. I took on 2 new clients in January, both litigation support files, both requiring exactly the kind of careful pattern analysis that had, essentially, saved my own life. I had dinner with a friend the month after I moved, at a restaurant on Queen Street West we'd been meaning to try for 2 years. She asked me how I was. Good, I said, and I meant it in the plain factual way, not the way people mean it when they're actually not. You seem different, she said. I feel different, I said, lighter maybe. She refilled my wine glass. Outside the window, it had started to snow the way it does in Toronto in March. Fat, wet flakes that melt on the pavement almost immediately, promising spring and not quite delivering. What will you do with the county property, she asked. I had been thinking about that. I had plans drawn up, not extravagant, just thoughtful. A proper studio off the back of the house with north-facing windows, for whatever I decide to do with the parts of myself that don't fit into a forensic report. A garden where my grandmother's garden used to be, because I had finally learned, watching someone do it for decades before I paid attention, roughly how she planted things. Keep it, I said. Fix it up. Spend time there. And, she said, because she knows me. And figure out what comes next, I said. I'm not in a hurry. The snow kept falling. The restaurant was warm. I finished my dinner, split a dessert I did not need and did not regret, and drove home to the apartment I had rented, temporary, intentionally, because I knew I would not stay in the city forever. My grandmother used to say, make sure you know what you're walking toward, not just what you're walking away from. I hadn't known, when I was building that spreadsheet at the kitchen table 14 months ago, cataloging every transfer Trevor and his mother thought I would never find. I had known what I was documenting, I had known what it meant, but I hadn't yet understood what would come after. I understand it now, and I'm walking toward it.